What is important is that, okay, that training has been carried out, that change of policy has been made, but will it last? Has it found its way into the fibre of this police force, which was doing so poorly with women so recently? What is particularly impressive on top of that, in my view, is that the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, and his Deputy Kate Green are setting up what I recommended, which is a scrutiny panel to meet and at random to take on arrests, how they've been done, any strip searches, whether they've been done, why they've been done, and to look into all the areas that the chapters of my inquiry found deficient. This panel, I've not yet met them. I'm meeting them early December, but they're drawn, I believe, from a really wide range of people, victims, organisations, lawyers, other people from the criminal justice system, probation, and they're going to scrutinise deeply to make sure that this is not just 26 out of 28 boxes ticked, but real change.
Dame Vera, it's Jason Farrell here. We featured Sophie's story this morning, which you know very well, a woman, a domestic violence victim who was arrested by police after allegations made by her abusive partner. We've also seen that, at the time that she complained about it, she was told that there was nothing wrong with what had happened, even that after your review criticised what had happened to her. What do you think about that? You know that story very well.
Yes, that was an appalling arrest, totally unnecessary and therefore unlawful, made of a respectable professional woman at 3 a.m. because a man who tried to strangle her only 2 months ago made a counter-allegation that 15 months before she'd knocked the wing mirror off his car, committing a crime. That her complaint, which it's right to say was rejected by Greater Manchester Police about a month after my report was published, that it was rejected in what is frankly, obviously she sent it to me, a rather perverse way of setting out a small number of the facts and drawing the inevitable conclusion from this process that the police were absolutely right. That is why I am so pleased that Andy Burnham is going to have a scrutiny panel to look and see how complaints are being done now. Have we made a change? Was this the old regime and now we can look forward to some sunny uplands, or are we no better than we were before? I must say I feel positive because the Chief Constable himself was profoundly critical of the way this complaint had been managed. And it is, inevitably the case, isn't it, with a huge organisation like the second biggest force in the country, that it takes a while for stuff to seep through. And I'm just impressed and pleased, because I recommended it, that the mayoralty is going to drive it through.
Yeah, there's a lot to be pleased about by what's come out from the Mayor's report on this. But are you concerned about the complaint system itself? Because it's not just Sophie's case, is it? There's a number of the people who've been part of your review who found themselves incredibly frustrated. And there won't always be yourself or I there to kind of scrutinise. I know you've got to say there's a scrutiny panel, but the complaint system itself just seems to have an opaque lack of independence about it, with police often are still marking their own homework.
They are still marking their own homework. I don't like it one bit. It is that has always held back fresh eyes on police complaints. Is firstly they go, as is the case, if you complain about a shop, it goes to the shop first and they see what happens. But there's usually an independent mechanism to follow if they just back themselves up, as is often the practice. The independent mechanism is what's harder here, because the sort of theory has been perpetually that if you go outside policing to investigate policing, the people who are doing it won't understand policing, and so they will miss part of the point. And there was a whole time, I recall well, when I was Victims Commissioner and before, when we tried to recruit into that appellate process, the Independent Office of Police Complaints, people from elsewhere who had done this kind of scrutiny, so people from HMRC, for instance, to try to bring that fresh view and to get outside the policing establishment. That's extremely difficult, because there is an argument that unless you know how the police work, as people like I do, for instance, who've been defence lawyers, in the past, then you will miss the points in some of the complaints and actually not do well for the complainants. So that is a great institutional problem. What is good here, though, I think, I'm not saying this is perfect, but really, what more can the police do? They are going to look. What more can the mayor do? They are going to look at complaints. So there will be, as it were, not a third tier to answer the complaint, but a scrutiny over how they're being answered at all, so that a fresh look will in fact come from this range of people, none of them who have anything to do with policing, who are going to look into it from start to finish. So this panel will look at whether arrests are lawful, if anyone should ever be strip searched and why, and the questioning and the complaints and the way that domestic abuse is dealt with, which played a big role. They were doing that very badly in my report. So I have to invest, and I do, faith in this panel of experts from outside policing who will nonetheless throw a definite searchlight on it. Mm-hmm. Greater Manchester mayorality is really quite ashamed of how the police behaved before, and they are determined to make it good. So we must give them a chance. I look forward to meeting this panel in December.
Dame Vera, we mentioned that 2 of the 28 recommendations hadn't been implemented. One of them, female-only cells, one of the reasons given for that, why it wasn't implemented, was overcrowding in prisons and then police cells being used for some of that. Is that a legitimate pushback to that recommendation? And in general, how fearful are you of the secondary effects of overcrowding in prisons?
It's overcrowding in police custody, because what happens is when the prisons are full, of course, they look to somewhere else to put them, and the only other cells available will be in police. That's the reason why people have had to be let out of prison, so that you don't have to stop arresting people, whatever they've done, because you haven't got a police cell to put them in. I think the overcrowding point is probably a valid one. What they have done is allocate a number of women's cells, and that's what I wanted. The real point of that was actually to make sure that things which were going very, very badly wrong before this inquiry, such as the provision of sanitary protection for women, wasn't being made available. They had to press the buzzer when they were in the cell and needed this stuff, and then long gaps before people came, and invariably a man. So now they have allocated cells, and when they're to be used for women, because a woman has been arrested, that should be coordinated. There will be that provision in cells, and it should be then attended only by a woman officer. The problem has been that sometimes they've had to say, well, we haven't got any women in custody, so we'll have to use these for men. That's the problem so far, but the policy intent remains steadfast, and that's something else that I must say is pretty impressive. Kate Green, the deputy mayor, has recruited exactly what I recommended, which is a super custody inspector who is not a police officer, who is appointed by the mayoralty, is going to go round to custody suites at random without notice, enter and look at anything that person wants to do to see how it's going. I have no doubt whatsoever it's a woman, that these aspects of women's treatment will be right at the top of the hit list.
Dame Vera, one final very quick question for you. Should this be a blueprint for the rest of the police across the country? It's naive to think these problems that only exist in Manchester.
Definitely, it should be a blueprint. I am tomorrow going to the Home Office, to the relevant strategy board, to discuss exactly that, how these recommendations now taken on can be spread. In addition, there are some things which Greater Manchester now say they won't do, which I said were unlawful. If unlawful practices can be cancelled in one force, then it makes it all the clearer that they're unlawful in others. So it's going to be in the police interest to follow Greater Manchester Police, and tomorrow I'll be pressing for exactly that to do.
Dame Vera, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.